Hi, you've reached the Decarb Connect podcast, and my name is Alex Cameron. I'm the founder of Decarb Connect. We are taking a little break, so we're just going to have 2 weeks off from new recordings of podcasts. And instead of a new episode, what we're doing is highlighting two of our best and most downloaded podcasts. So this week, reintroducing you all, some of you may have heard it and some of you may not, to our episode with Rob West, the founder and lead analyst at Thunderset Energy. Rob's session really digs into the economics of decarbonisation and kind of more specifically than that, looks at the technologies that are already available that can help industry and those reliant on energy intensive operations to get to net zero quickly. So I hope you'll enjoy it. And again, we're just away for 2 weeks, so don't go anywhere because we'll be back soon. Thanks a lot. So our last couple of podcasts have focused more on questions of leadership and also how to deploy technologies at the pilot stage. Today's a bit different. So I'm very pleased to be joined by Rob West, who's the founder of Thunderset Energy. And we're going to be talking more about the economics of decarbonisation. Rob's firm focuses very much on the energy transition. So it's going to bring, I'm sure, some good viewpoints to this. Rob, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me.
So I think you know that our mission, my mission at Decarb Connect, is that we focus kind of narrowly, I suppose, in on decarbonisation specifically for hard to abate sectors. Just tell me a little bit about Thunderset Energy and how you came to the focus on energy transition. What was your route into that?
Well, I've been a research analyst for over a decade covering the energy sector. And, talking to investors on Wall Street and in the City of London, you come to this question about energy transition and they all kind of seize up and say, yeah, the way we're going to do this is we're going to pull all our capital out of energy intensive industries. And it strikes me that doesn't deliver us an energy transition. That just delivers us, sort of devastating energy and industrial shortage. And if you want to affect change, it's not about finding, ways to pull capital out. It's about finding ways to put capital in. What are the things you can put capital into that are going to earn you a return as an investor or as a company, improve your economics, and take CO2 out of the system in the process. And that's what we do at Thunderset Energy is we try and find those things. We try and help our clients find those things, and we try and back it up with transparent data and models and analysis. Because as we'll come on to, Alex, there's just too much hype and too much advertising, in this space where really I think what we need is some cold, steely economic analysis.
Yeah, I think I emailed you earlier in the week that I'd really enjoyed your hydrogen note. And I know it will have been a note that not everybody agrees with because it took a note of caution to a lot of the discussion around it. But I can see that approach in the way that you're kind of providing data. It's not to say, no, not ever. It's just saying, okay, but let's dial it down a bit and actually look at the data.
Well, the way I think about it is like this, is, we're trying to answer the question, how do we meet the world's energy needs and take out all the CO2? If the answer is with flying spaghetti monsters, we're going to be excited about flying spaghetti monsters. Whatever it is, there's no axe to grind. There's no right answer we're looking for. We're just following the numbers. And when you follow the numbers, I just can't get anywhere close on hydrogen. Not today, not by 2040, not by 2050. And I think this is one of the areas where there's a lot of hype. And I think companies and investors need to really look at the numbers to avoid getting caught up in things they might regret later.
Well, before I take you off on a hydrogen rabbit hole, I think that the thing that we were hoping to narrow in on, I was really interested in the work that you've been doing around a roadmap to net zero. So tell me a little bit about that. But if you could start with, what is that an answer to? So where did this kind of piece of work originate from? And then tell me a bit about where you're at with it.
Well, I think research has a look over here approach, right? So you start off and you're looking at supercapacitors. And the only way to know the role of supercapacitors in the energy transition is to, go through 10,000 patents in supercapacitors, learn what there is to learn, model what there is to model, and figure out how you're going to use this stuff, what's it going to cost, and where are the best places to put it. So you spend a month looking at supercapacitors, and you find, wow, you can take out 1 billion tons of CO2, hybridizing short bursts of energy use and everything from trucks to elevators. And it's probably going to be better than lithium ion, and there's no rare earths, and they last 1 million charge-discharge cycles with no degradation. And here are the companies that make them. And this is a really interesting, non-obvious opportunity in the energy transition. So you take a topic like this, and then you take another one, then you take another one, and a couple of years later, you've got around 100 topics. And each one of them, what we're looking at is if you can score them on various metrics. The first metric is, how technically ready are these things? I mean, as a company, you can't invest in a science project at scale. You might spend a lot of time trying to turn it beyond a science project, but it's got to be technically ready for you to put capital into it. Second thing is the economics. You've got to know how much it costs and what the returns are. And the third thing is about how much CO2 it takes out of the system. So this is where things get quite interesting, is if we know those different categories, we can divide number 2 by number 3, and we can arrive at a metric which is called abatement cost. So what is the cost per ton, per ton of CO2 that we're taking out of the system every year? And adding all of these technologies together, you end up with a cost curve of different abatement options. And I think the results of this are fascinating. So here's the lie of the land, Alex. Today, the energy system is 73,000 terawatt hours per year. That's equivalent to a kitchen toaster running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for every man, woman, and child on the planet. That energy system emits 40 billion tons of CO2. If we fast forward to 2050, it's going to be something like 120,000 terawatt hours of energy globally. And it's going to, if we do nothing, emit 80 billion tons of CO2 per year. So we've got to take out 80 billion tons of CO2 per year to get to net zero by 2050. How do you do it? Well, if you add up all these technologies we've looked at, I think you can take out about 150 billion tons of CO2. So you can decarbonize the world twice over. And this puts us in a sort of luxurious position that we don't need to lunge at any energy technology that comes our way that can take out carbon. We only need the most economical 50% of the total curve. And to put a number to it, the sort of cutoff point ends up being about $75 a ton. So you think you can decarbonize the entire world for a CO2 price of $75 a ton. There's stuff that costs between $100 and $1,000 a ton. We don't need this stuff. This stuff is going to end up being a bubble. You don't need to do this stuff in an economic decarbonization. And so you end up with all sorts of questions like, what are the good technologies? What are the ones you really want to get behind? Why do costs matter so much in the transition? And what do we need from policymakers to make this transition as economic and rapid as possible? And those are all questions I could probably bore you with for a very long time, but I'll stop for now.
Well, no, I'm going to come back to those questions. But I actually, before we do look at those, there's one thing you said just there about not needing to lunge at a solution at the moment. And as I said before, my focus and most of the people I speak to are on the kind of industrial side. So they're the energy management in steel or cement or strategy or technology teams, whoever it may be, that are kind of setting and deploying. And I think I get a real sense from them that they need to lunge at something. I'm not suggesting they need to, because of their own investment cycles and how long it takes to actually secure, select, deploy and scale, and then roll out further. That there's this real tension between, we need to know now, and yet we don't have the evidence and so forth. I just wanted, I know your perspective, what it sounds like the perspective is more, we don't need to as investors or, to lunge at a solution, but I wondered what your perspective was on, that sense from industrials that, a real tension between, I need to know now, and, my investment cycles are tricky and whatever else. What do you make of that?
Well, I think this is where the technology readiness aspect comes into the mix, because there's technologies in our screen like nuclear fusion, where we can go through 30 companies that are doing this, but the earliest we think anybody could have something remote to being commercial is about 2028. We haven't yet generated an energy gain, so more energy out than the energy we put in. We haven't really sustained anything close to an energy gain for more than about 10 milliseconds. And you go through all these companies and their pathways, and look, this is 10 years away at least. So it's no good as an industrial company to say, we're just going to carry on as normal and just hope that in 10 years' time nuclear fusion comes through and saves the day. No, we've got to find stuff we can do now and start improving the situation. But there is stuff that works now, and I think where I get most excited in the work we do with our clients is helping them understand things they can put capital into now that can earn them a return and take CO2 out. And the best example of that is nature-based carbon offsets. I think this can do somewhere between 15 and 30 billion tons a year of CO2 abatement for a cost between $3 and $50 per ton. And there's vast numbers of options in here.
So can you just talk me through, if you were going to pick, because I know there's such a long list of things that fall into that category, what would be the sort of three that you would say, not necessarily that you personally back, but which are the ones that have grabbed your interest or that you think on an industrial scale could be worth looking at?
Well, if I look at our bridge of how we meet the world's energy needs and take out all the CO2, then there's 5 buckets. So it might be worth running through those 5 buckets.
Yeah, that'd be great.
The first one is the obvious one, which is renewables. On our numbers, renewables will make up about 35% of the global grid by 2050. That means they do just under 20% of all of the total decarbonisation. But they really can't do more. And the reason they can't do more is because of their volatility and because of the pace of scaling them up. We're currently growing renewables at a pace of 300 terawatt hours per year in a 70,000 terawatt hour energy system. You do the maths, and it's going to take 170 years to get to 50% of just today's energy mix. The second bucket is coal to gas switching. So, for every megawatt hour of energy that you unlock, you're taking out about 60 to 70% of the CO2 by switching from coal to gas. Rough numbers, gas power is 0.35 tons of CO2 per megawatt hour, and coal is 0.85 tons of CO2 per megawatt hour. And so that ends up doing a vast amount of the heavy lifting. You might be thinking, but you're still using gas, and gas is still a fossil fuel, so aren't I still going to have CO2? And we'll come on to these buckets. So the next one is next generation carbon capture and storage. This is actually the smallest portion of our total bridge, but there are new reactor designs coming that are going to make it much easier to capture that CO2 and get it in the ground. The fourth bucket is nature-based carbon offsets. This is the largest in our bridge. So this is reforestation and restoring carbon into soils. A sentence I never thought I would say in my life is that soil carbon is one of the most fascinating topics available to mankind. And really, just to put it, really briefly, if you look at all of the incremental CO2 that's gone into the atmosphere since 1800, you can make the case that a third of it is from releasing carbon in soils by plowing them up every year in agriculture. In the US, we've gone from 4% organic carbon in our soils to 1%. And that transition culminated in this horrible period of history called the Dust Bowl. And there's technologies that restore that soil carbon. And with a $30 per ton CO2 price, the numbers that a corn farmer in the Midwest can make more money farming carbon than farming corn. We'll park that one. The final bucket is industrial efficiency. And this is where it gets really gritty. This is using energy more efficiently within industry. And we found that typical industries we've measured going through 30, 40 different technologies, you can take out about 20% of the CO2 for a CO2 price below $75 a ton. And that's in that efficiency bucket. So if you add those 5 together, that gets us to net zero by 2050. while meeting, almost doubling of total energy demand globally. It's amazing stuff.
And of those, it's the nature-based ones that, as you were saying, kind of interest you the most. I know, again, as in all things related to energy transition or decarbonisation, there's millions of, so many different viewpoints and a lot of impassioned viewpoints for and against these. I think that I have to say, I haven't talked that much to any of my industrial audience about the nature-based offsets. I know they're doing it, but I think the little bit of feedback I have was concern about just the logistics, the reality of what was available to them. But I don't know if that's a real concern or just lack of information. So I don't know. Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, there's a couple of things in here. I mean, the first one is what is your agenda? Our agenda, helping our clients, is meeting the energy and industrial needs of the world while taking out all the CO2. And if that's your agenda, nature-based solutions are the largest, lowest cost opportunity on the entire cost curve. But there are other people I talk to, and their agenda is different, and it's we've got to remove all fossil fuels from the energy mix. And nature-based solutions isn't part of that. Nature-based solutions actually says, well, it's going to be cheaper to keep using fossil fuels in some places because of their energy density and the pre-existing infrastructure, and just offset that CO2. And that's the biggest barrier I get. Interestingly, the people pushing that barrier tend to be in the renewable or hydrogen or energy industries, which kind of makes you wonder about conflicts of interest. But that's another story.
Well, and that exists on every side of it, doesn't it, as well? So, I think that's the lens all of us have to look at information through, because whether that's the kind of historic discussions with oil and gas.
No, I really try and be completely impartial. If I look at anything and it works and it's economic, it goes in our cost curve, and it comes back to the flying spaghetti monster.
But that isn't one of the buckets, to be clear.
To be clear, it's not a bucket. I think the other one is really about how much have we done it at scale. And so data we have is you've done about 200 million tons of carbon offset sales. To put that in perspective, the global CCS market is about 40 million tons per year, could be 100 million tons by 2030. Globally, we're currently at 40 billion tons of CO2, so there's got to be a vast scale up here. But I think the thing to say about it is everything needs to scale up. So, with nature-based solutions, we're scaling up a billion-year-old concept called a tree, called photosynthesis, which has happened at scale in nature for hundreds of millions of years. And conversely, we're scaling up something like green hydrogen. We're scaling up something that just has not existed at all up until very recently. And so I don't think scale should count against nature-based solutions. And the third question is about reversal. So, the fear is that you replant a forest, you put carbon back into the soil, and then some time goes by and, oh, look, the forest burned down, the soil's been degraded again. But actually, this is true for almost every technology we've looked at. I mean, if you take the data on a carbon capture and storage site, you've got to monitor that site for 50 years after you stop injecting to make sure the CO2 hasn't leaked out again. If you're building a renewable asset, it degrades between 1.5% and 2.5% a year from the time you put it in the ground, and after 20 to 30 years, you shut it down. And so, everything has a risk of reversal, and this is why we need to just start doing it and step up doing it and keep stepping up doing it. But I think just a sustainable number is between 15 and 30 billion tons a year of nature-based solutions, and we've got models on how we get that.
So if you were on the other side of all of this, let's say you were working in a cement sector company or steel or something like that, and you were tasked with the nuts and bolts of decarbonising the company, the core processes, what would you do? What, with your data focus, what would you look for first? What would you want to know? What would your next step be if you were tasked with that?
Well, I'd want to know, what are the options to take my industrial process, uplift margins, and take out all the CO2? And I'd want to rank them all on a piece of paper and I want to pick the ones that are technically promising, low risk, improve the numbers, take out the CO2, and I want to say, how do I make those happen? And we've done work in this space. I'll give you a couple of examples. But we had a client ask us, what are the different options to decarbonize residential heat? So we took a dozen options, we modeled them. The cheapest option is an efficient gas boiler with as low methane leaks as possible, as efficiently produced and distributed gas as possible, offset with nature-based solutions. And for the average home in Europe, you could take out all of their household heating CO2 for a cost about $50 per household per year. Everything is plotted on this cost curve, from heat pumps to residential solar heaters to district heating, all the way up to the top of the cost curve, where I can build you a green hydrogen heating system for your house, but it's going to cost you $2,600 per household per year, and not not the 50 that is the one I want at the bottom of the cost curve. I like to look at it this way because there's a saying I love about cost curves, which is no bar of the cost curve means anything except relative to all the other bars. And I think that the real danger, for looking at this stuff, is you look at one bar of the cost curve and you get obsessed by this one bar of the cost curve, and you're like, right, gung ho, let's make it happen. But if you miss the other bars that are easier, lower cost, you're going to get blown out of the water. And so that's the sort of analysis that I think is going to help companies to get there, is a really broad look at all the options, narrowing in on the best options, and then making those ones happen.
There was one other question that I was going to ask you, which now is slightly out of sync, so I apologize to my listeners and to you. But I also, you spend your whole life looking at these numbers. You're digging into data sets of all sorts. I have a very basic question for you, which is what do you make of the kind of debate on carbon pricing? There's a lot of heat around that. What will the price be? What should it be? What's the most effective way of pricing it? What's your view on what the price is likely to look like in the next few years, and what should it look like in the next few years?
Well, this is the single most important question in all of energy policy. What we've got right now is a snake pit. I mean, if you look at the various incentives that exist for energy transition technologies, it's a mess. In the US, we're currently paying as much as $340 per ton in subsidies for electric vehicles. We're paying $200 per ton in subsidies for renewable diesel. We're paying $35 to $50 a ton for CO2 capture, and we're paying zero for industrial efficiency technologies and nature-based solutions. So the atmosphere doesn't care where the CO2 has come from. Why are we putting policies in place that act as kingmakers for a bunch of our friends over here, and actually stifle the decarbonisation technologies on the other side of the curve, because now they've got to compete with subsidized incumbents, and it's craziness. So we've done models where if you start with a $40 per ton flat CO2 price and scale it up to $75 per ton by 2035, you could decarbonize the entire United States with a level playing field. Any technology that is going to save CO2 effectively is saving you that CO2 price between $40 and $75 a ton. If you build this model and actually model it out line by line by line across a very complicated model of the entire US economy, you get to net zero by 2050. You actually get there. Unlike these policies that give tax support to our friends, which just enrich our friends and don't get us there, you create about 500,000 jobs. You unlock $3.5 trillion of new investment by 2050, and you do it in a way that improves the United States industrial competitiveness. This is the single most important aspect of this is competitiveness. And I'll tell you what keeps me up at night is I look at some of these policies that are getting enacted around the developed world right now, and I'm sorry, but they don't make us any more competitive. They make us less competitive. They make our energy prices higher. They make our grids less resilient. Meanwhile, China is currently filing 70% of all of the patents in the world. That's the highest share for any country in history. there's 150 major patent families. China is the leading patent filer in 147 of them, leading with a margin between 8 and 80 times in 90% of those categories. And their lead is accelerating in 135 of the 150 categories. We're sitting here in the developed world passing navel-gazing policies that make our industrial complex less competitive. And meanwhile, China is saying, we're going to become the most efficient, technologically advanced nation in all of these different categories. We're 30% of the CO2, 60% of our grid is coal, nod to decarbonisation, but we don't really care. And, you know, I'm sorry if this sounds really vocal and outspoken, but, you know, over the next 50 years, I'm terrified of this and what it means. And so this is why we need a flat CO2 price. We need to do our decarbonisation in a way that makes companies more economically competitive. And I'm just worried that any other option is going to end in disaster.
I'm sure you get people hammering in on that viewpoint, but I certainly agree. For me, I just don't understand the argument of not investing in new technologies that a vast number of markets around the world are, you know, demanding. Why wouldn't you want to support that as a country or a, you know?
Well, I think there's only one answer to that, which is, you know, and this is really sad, but I've done work with companies, not done work, I've pitched work and refused work with companies that are trying to stifle the progress, you know, either because they're sitting on very, very large subsidies at the moment and they don't want other people to displace them on the cost curve. Or, you know, I did work with one company and I was going through the numbers with them and saying, look, I just can't get there on your technology. I just can't get the numbers to work. They can't get you anywhere close to competitiveness. And I said, well, that's actually right. We're not going to push back on your numbers. Our plan is just to lobby. Our plan is just to lobby so hard that we make policymakers force people to use our technology, even though it's more expensive. And you know, you hear stuff like this, and I don't want to work with companies doing that. So I think that this is the challenge of energy transition is, you know, you open up this big wallet and you end up with all the sharks coming in to feed on the open wallet. And again, this is the argument for a flat CO2 price is we're not picking favorites. We're not picking the technologies that lobbied the hardest. We're picking the technologies that are most economic and allowing them to scale up unencumbered.
I think that's a very neat big full stop moment. Many thanks, Rob. Great to talk to you today. You were very helpful throughout the kind of development of the event, providing a different lens and a different viewpoint. So many thanks again. If anyone listening would like more information on what Rob does, or perhaps to sign up to the Thunder Said Energy newsletter, go to thundersaidenergy.com and you'll find that link in our podcast notes as well. If you're interested in joining in an episode, maybe coming to talk to me about a specific theme or your views on industrial decarbonisation, then get in touch through our website, which is decarbconnect.com. And last but not least, there's a silent partner in this podcast who really does their best to work with me to make it as audible and professional as possible, and that is Jano Media. So I just want to say thank you to everyone there for all the work that they do too. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.